Alrighty, guys, this is snugsonblitz, and I'm back with another video for you today. We did lights, we did tank destroyers, we did mediums, so here we are with the last video in the series, must-have heavy tanks. What are the heavy tanks I think you should invest your credits or gold or cash into picking up in this game? Now, unlike my tier list where I rank them based on how capable they are in the battlefield, this is more about enjoyment. Are they competitive? Are they unique? Are they interesting? Are they different? Is there something special about them that can get me excited? Or do I forget about them 2 seconds after I play them? I'm going to hopefully answer those questions today. And I don't want to waste any more time because we have quite a lot of tanks to get through. 136 are in my garage. We're going to start for tier 5. I believe I have most of the tier 5s, but if I'm missing one or two, it's not a big deal. They're just not that important to me anyway. So, shall we just jump right in? I think we should, but I would like to ask, if you're liking the series, if you like my channel, consider hitting subscribe. You can also like this video, that helps out the algorithm, and comment down below. What I would like for you to do today is a specific comment in letting me know what tanks you recommend that you think are must-have. The name of the tank and a few words to describe it. So, for example, the I don't know, E100, big boom gun, armored beast, HE, crazy HE, or something like that. And that will give me an idea of what your mindset is when you chose those tanks. So I'd love to hear from you. But you're here to hear what I have to say, so let's get to it, shall we? Starting off in tier 5 with the Medjay, which is, I didn't know this when I first looked at it, but it's actually an Excelsior, yes, just over here. Copy paste. I thought it was a Churchill variant, but it's actually the Excelsior. I didn't have the Excelsior for the longest time, which is why I didn't notice that. This is interesting in the sense it has 4 shells. Oh, 3 shells, I forget which. Either way, is it a must-have tank? No, I don't think it is. It's just a little bit too slow. And I know heavy tanks are not known for their speed, but some tanks just are a little bit rough when it comes to mobility. This is one such tank, so I'd give it a pass. What about the BDR G1B? This is one of the tanks I think you must have in your garage, yes. In tier 5, this is one of the tanks you can really seal club in. It's decently fast for heavy. The gun works, the armor works. The cupola is a little bit of an issue, but still, it can perform on the battlefield. You can have some pretty decent games in this tank, and so that's why it gets my seal of approval. What about the Excelsior? Well, to be honest with you, I'm just waiting for it to turn into a premium tank so that I can sell it for gold. So hurry up, Wargaming, change all these tanks to premium. So no, it does not make the cut. How about the Churchill? Well, this is even slower than those 2 tanks, if I'm not mistaken. Not going to check, but it definitely feels like that anyway. So I would say this can be given a pass. Don't bother with it. What about the KV-1, which has a legendary camo, which is very unusual at this tier. Looks kind of nice, I must admit. At one point, I would have said it was in consideration for a must-have tank, but these days, I don't think so. It's okay. I mean, it's got decent armor. The gun hits decently hard, but there's just a better tank out there in the BDR, I think, when it comes to not hold down, but the kind of high alpha heavy tank. So that's the BDR, in my opinion. And if you want solid armor, decent mobility, and a gun that can hit, but it's more of a pew-pew type gun, I would go for this one. This is the T1 Heavy, so this gets my seal of approval. Yes, it is a must-have tank. Get it. Really bully your enemy lineups. This can perform in tier 6, no problem. In 5, easily. In 4, absolutely dominant. So I would say that makes it a must-have tank. Moving on to tier 6, we have the 40TP Habicha. I think I did pretty well in this tank. I can't remember my stats in it, but I think it's about 70, 68 or something like that. I'd give it a pass. Why? There's nothing to write home about. I've got to have something that I can say, yes, that's why I like this tank. And this tank doesn't have that, so I'd give it a pass. Likewise, with the Skoda PJS, nothing to write home about. I know what tank it's meant to be. You'll see that later on. I mean, it's decently strong, but is it enjoyable? I don't really think so. So give it a pass. What about the ARL44? Will this make the cut? I have to say, absolutely yes. This is one of those tanks that can do a little bit of everything. Armor works, the speed works, the gun works, the hit points are solid. So you've got a very deadly tank, and that's why you often see a lot of good seal clubbers running around with two of these tanks, or another tank that I'll talk about, or I talked about already, sorry, earlier on in when I did tank destroyers, which are the Hellcats, well, the Hellcat in Tier 6. So, yeah, do yourself a favor and get this tank anyway, the ARL44. What about its copy-paste brother with the big alpha gun instead of the fast-firing gun? It's decently strong, but I give the edge to the ARL44. It's more enjoyable. You've got two choices of guns. I prefer the fast-firing gun because it's got better pen, and you can really do a number on the enemy lineup. This gun, decently strong, but it just doesn't make the cut for me. The Juno, it's a heavy tank. Don't know what else to say about it. Again, I did decently well in it, I think 62% or something like that. But do I remember this tank? No, I do not. So I would say just keep it moving. The Blasterite, I mean, looks the beast. Wow, what crazy camo is this? Again, almost silly. Goofy, your video game. Ugh, tacky. It should be this nickname, but do I recommend it? That's what we're here to answer, and I think I'm going to have to say no, only because you've got this tank, the Tog. It's slightly better than Blasterite, I believe, in pretty much every aspect, and that's why I'll give this the edge and my seal of approval. Yes, push forward in this tank. Make sure you soak up that damage, really cause trouble for enemy lineups by forcing them to shoot you and giving your teammates chance to use you as protection and cover while they get around and get easy damage, hopefully. Does it always work? No. But that's the idea. And the reason I give this seal of approval is because my friend recommended it to me a long time ago. I didn't believe him, but I managed to pick it up for I think 2,000 gold a while back. Had some silly fun. I was like, wow, this tank is definitely not what I thought it was. Don't know why Bushka didn't like playing it. The KV-1S is sort of heavium. The gun hits a little bit hard for heavium, if you ask me. Solid tank, definitely solid. One of the better selections, I think, but does it make the cut? Sadly, it does not. What about the KV-2? Well, there's one word to describe this tank. Derp. This tank is a derp machine. It's one of the original derp meisters. The SU-152, of course, being the original. This was the second. You load this gun and you go into battle, throw a frick ton of HE on it, and just laugh. Consider it just funny gameplay. So it gets my seal of approval. Yes, it's a must-have tank. You've got to try the derp. Don't have to keep playing it, and you've got to make sure you aim it all the way, but you got to play around with it for a little bit. And it's a tech tree tank, so it doesn't cost you any gold. What about the Object 244, which looks eerily similar to the Skoda we had earlier? Where is it? There, PJS. Well, very, very similar. I think the 244 at one point was one of the strongest tier 6 tanks. Still strong, still works, but I've got a tank that I think it has got it beat, so this one does not make the cut. The VK3601. This definitely gets my seal of approval. At one point, this tank absolutely stunk. You couldn't do anything with it. Everybody would pen you, medium tanks, light tanks, from the front. You're like, I'm a heavy tank, for goodness sake. But then Wargaming saw the early ways, gave it armor, and it definitely works. That's why this tank gets my seal of approval. Yeah, this is one tank you gotta have in your garage for bullying tier 5s and 6s. You can really cause problems with them up close and personal. What about the M6? Well, personally, I would just go down a tier and play the T1 Heavy. This is a poor substitute, in my opinion, although it's in tier 6. But yeah, it gets too easily penned compared to the tier 5 tank. So, no. The Polak tank, well, it's pretty dang ugly. It looks more of a submarine, if you ask me. Do I like this tank? Well, it's quite strong, I must say. Had some very good games in it, but is it a must-have tank? Sadly, I don't think so. The Cyborg, well, it's a copy-paste of the M6 that we just talked about 2 seconds ago. Looks kind of cool, that's why I picked it up. But a must-have tank? I don't think so. Tempted to sell it for gold, I must say. What about the Smasher, the OP God in tier 7? Abso-freaking-lutely, seal of approval. Yeah, a must-have tank in your garage. This is just so deadly. It's the ultimate game changer. Things are going well, one shot, poof, his health disappears. Another shot, poof, his health disappears. Poof, a third gamer just gets absolutely vaporized. The Smasher is an accurate KV2, and that's all you need to say about it. So this definitely gets my seal of approval. What about the Force Witch, the new entry into the Halloween tanks with the 4 shells, a little bit awkward, a little bit hard for people to play. They don't understand the gun mechanism. But is it strong? Decently so. Do I recommend it? Surprisingly, I do. Yeah, I mean, this tank can cause all sorts of problems for the enemy lineup. The armor is very solid, just depending on which tank is facing it. But to me, yeah, this is one tank you could have in your garage as well. What about the Pharaoh? Well, it's like an AMX 50-100 in tier 7, but doesn't get my juices flowing. It's a pretty decent tank, but decent doesn't sell me. I need more. So I would just give this one a pass. But if you can pick it up, sure, why not? What about the Annihilator? Abso-freaking-lutely. Why the frick would you not choose it? Oh my goodness me. Before I had the speed boost, the super speed boost, which was awesome. Not quite as strong as it once was, but 3 shells are still so deadly. Double them up in a platoon and watch the enemy team rant and rave and bitch and moan at how incompetent you are. So yeah, get this tank.
The E10 is essentially if an E100 in tier 10 decided, you know what, put on a little bit of weight, need to head over to the gym, pump some iron, trim some fat, go on a diet, and look nice for the ladies. And you know what? At the same time, I'm going to drop down to tier 7, take it easy. Ta-da! The E10. Is this a must-have tank? Well, first of all, hopefully all of you have got this in your garage, and with a little bit of effort, if you've been grinding tanks or playing the game recently, you have probably got it fully loaded, which is a nice gift from Wargaming. So thank you very much. I think this is a good tank, but is it a must-have tank? I think I'm going to have to say yes. Originally, I was going to say no, I have to admit. But thinking about this and how helpful it is for newer players to learn how to play a tank in the lower tiers where it's not as hard. Against tier 6, this tank can be a real bully. Against tier 7, solid. Against tier 8, yeah, not quite as strong, but the gun can work. And against lightly armored targets, you'll be able to pen them left, right, and center and use some HE on like the SP1Cs or, I don't know, LTGs, things like that. So yeah, you can have some fun games in this tank. So it gets my seal of approval. Get this tank. Well, hopefully you already have. So it's free after all, right? Talking about free, this is another tank I picked up for free, the Skoda T45. This tank works for me. The armor works, the mobility works, the gun works, the alpha works, the pen works. But is it a tank I recommend? Unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no. I think this was an easy tank to play. I think it was a solid tank. I think it's not hard to play, but the only thing it's missing for me is just the enjoyment factor. I didn't really enjoy this tank that much. But is it an easy tank to learn how to do well? I think so. So if that's what you're looking for, go for it. But unfortunately, it doesn't get my seal of approval. The 45 TP Habicha. Well, the armor kind of works. It's got tungsten. That's something interesting. But for me, this is a forgettable tank. There are other tanks in line that I think are more enjoyable. So this will get a solid pass. The Caro, the Italian tank destroyer in Tier 7. If you want to see it played well, you can check out a replay I shared from one of my subscribers. I think it's called Hero of the Day. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't a subscriber. It was just a guy I ran into, and he played it masterfully. Yeah, check out that game, Hero of the Day. That was what it was called. Is this a must-have tank, though? I didn't really enjoy this tank. It was just okay for me. So I have to give it a pass. There are better tanks in the line. What about the VZ line, the Tier 7, the 44-1? Well, I mean, as you can tell, this is a copy-paste. Or sorry, this is the original, I guess, of the Skoda T45. I'm not sure which one came first. Was the Skoda or this one, but essentially the same tank. I don't know why, but for me, the Skoda what's it called again? T45, is it? Yeah, T45 just played better. I found it an easier tank. This tank didn't quite get the bounces of the other one. I can't remember what else was different about it. But if I didn't give it to the Skoda T45, I can't give it to this one. What about the French Tier 7 tank, the AMX M445? Well, it's a heavy emiss type tank, decently fast. The pen works. It's got hit points to use. I think stick with your mediums. You'll be fine in this tank. Is it a great tank? No, I don't think so. Again, there are better tanks in the line that are more enjoyable. The BZ58. I think this is a solid Tier 7. I enjoyed playing this. I just ran into crappy team after crappy team. Oh, it was horrible. But it wasn't hard to play. I thought it was a competent tank. Unfortunately, I'm not going to give this my seal of approval. But I think this is a solid tank compared to many of the other tanks I've just mentioned. The IS-2. Well, this tank was the easiest tank for me to play in Tier 7. I don't know why. I didn't even load equipment on this, and I drove it around the battlefield just to try and get to the next tier. I was not interested in playing this tank because I had the IS-2 and the IS. I was like, I'm bored of the IS playstyle. Ended up with 65%. I was like, how the heck? I played it a few times since then. The problem with this tank is the aim time. It's horrible, and dispersion is horrible. You will miss if you don't aim it all the way. There's a few tanks like that, and this is definitely one of them. Can be a bit of a bully against the right targets. HE does work very well, but no, I cannot give my seal of approval because of horrible gun handling. The Juto. Well, it's got good DPM, that's about it. But a heavy tank for me really needs to have armor that works. This one doesn't really. It's really going to struggle against Tier 8 tanks to bounce many shells. I mean, it's got decent gun depression, but this is not a holding type heavy tank. But it's not even a heavium, it's too high. It's just not a very enjoyable tank. So I'd give this one a pass. So you can see a lot of Tier 7 tanks are not making the cut. The Black Prince is a tank I definitely think you should have in your garage. First of all, it's a tech tree tank, so that's nice. You can just pay credits for it. The gun is fantastic. The reload is great. The armor does work, and it's got that speed boost that makes it interesting. Without the speed boost, it's a little bit dull. But once you have that speed boost in, you can really get around the map sometimes and cause all sorts of trouble against tanks. Wiggling makes it very effective. Yeah, you can shred a lot of Tier 8 tanks in this tank. Because of the fast reload. And that's why I'm going to give this a must-have award. Yeah, say get this tank. Now, there's another tank I don't have here. It's the FV201, which is essentially the medium version of this tank. I think almost identical guns. I could be mistaken. But that is another tank I think you should have in your garage. It's just a faster, less armored tank of this. So either one can be great on the battlefield. FV201 was not a tank I really enjoyed when I played on my friend's account a long time ago. I just thought it was meh. However, when they added all the speed boost and, I don't know, armor things they gave it, whatever, I don't know, I was just like, whoa, this tank is much better than it once was. So that also gets my seal of approval. I just don't have it in my garage. The KV3, I'm going to save you some time. Just give it a pass. This is one tank that actually Top Gun is not the best, if you ask me. The Top Gun, you will struggle massively with AP to pen tier 8 tanks, especially heavy tanks. You won't be able to hit them. This tank, this gun, on the other hand, does work against tier 8. You've got the good pen on the premium, and the AP is solid as well. So I'd go with the not Top Gun, which is weird. But is it enjoyable? No, it's not really. So I'd give it a pass. It's too slow. You know, it's sluggish. If you got a speed, it's got the speed boost, which does help it somewhat. But I just go for the Black Prince over this any day of the week. So that's why it doesn't make the cut. The IS-2, shielded, as you can see by these little things over it. It looks kind of cool, but IS play style and IS-3 play style, very similar. They've been in the game for ages. Well, not this tank specifically, but the IS series have been in the game for ages. So many variants. We've got the IS-2, as I said earlier, didn't make the cut. This one, IS-2 Shield, also doesn't make the cut. It's better than the IS-2 if you ask me, but just not a very interesting tank. You've got the IS, and you also have the IS-2 here. So as you can see, 3 tanks that are almost identical. At one point, I would have given the nudge to the IS-2 as a must-have tank. I thought it was the best of the IS variants. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for you guys, they decided to buff the IS, the tech tree version, slightly, and now this is the more competent tank, I feel. I'm just going to say the IS nudges out the IS-2 because it's a tech tree tank. You can get it for free. The armor does work just as well now. I can't even tell what the differences are between these two tanks. They feel identical, but the IS gets the nudge, and that's why it gets the must-have award, because it'll teach you how to play a lot of tanks decently well. So the IS-2, sad to say, my love, or once beloved tier 7 tank, now does not get the award. What about the Tiger 1? Well, first of all, great camo, I must say that. That's nice. So makes me want to take it out for sure. It's the faster firing, faster moving Tiger. And you've got the Tiger P over here. It's the Tiger. First of all, the gold camos look fantastic. This is a must-have tank. Yeah, this is one of the best tanks in tier 7. It's a great heavium type tank, but it can be played like a heavy. You can go with mediums. You can do a lot on the battlefield. It's versatile, and that means a lot for me. That's why it gets my seal of approval. It's a must-have tank, absolutely. If you're looking for a premium Tiger, this is one option. We'll talk about another one. Similar, armor does work against many tanks. Side scraping works. It's decently fast. Doesn't get my seal of approval. That's a tough one. I'm gonna say no, because I think there's another premium tank that's Tiger-ish that I think outclasses this tank just a little bit. But this is a good tank for grinding credits in tier 7. I will say that. It's solid. Sadly, it doesn't get my award. Now, I think the Tiger 1 is the better of the two Tigers. That being said, this is no slouch. It's more of a heavy style tank, just a little bit slower, sluggish, but it works just as well. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the Tiger 1, but I think this still scrapes in as a must-have tank because it's a solid heavy tank. That's what heavy tanks should be. A little bit slow, a little bit of a bully. The armor can work. Yeah, I think this is a must-have tank. The T-29. Some people have said this tank is not that good. I didn't like it when I first played it. I really didn't think it was interesting, but it has been buffed, and let me tell you, this tank is one of the great tier 7 tanks. It absolutely gets my seal of approval because this tank will teach you gun depression, The gun works, the armor works, the speed, of course. It's a heavy tank, it's sluggish. It's basically a hull-down Tiger P, in my opinion. I think this is a great tank. This will teach you how to play many American tanks, such as the E5 or the T-32, even medium tanks. Just the armor works tier for tier. This is one of the strongest tanks in the game, and deserving of a place in your garage. What about the Skoda T56? Well, of all the IS variants, as you can tell, it's an IS-3 variant type tank. This is one of the better ones. Is it the best one? I'm not sure. I think I'd give the nudge to maybe one other tank. But yeah, the gun really can do the number on many tanks, and the armor will work quite well. Do I love the tank? Well, no, just because the playstyle is too similar. But is it a very solid tank? Absolutely. It's not going to make my must-have tank award just because there are two tanks very similar to this. I think get the nudge over it, but it just misses out. I will say that. But I really enjoyed playing this when I got it. I'm like, wow, this tank is a beast. The Peugeot CC56. The Tier 8 tank destroyer. Sorry, the Tier 8 heavy tank. I'm sorry, I called the Peugeot in Tier 7 a tank destroyer as well. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. What am I thinking? I'm talking about heavy tanks today. Oops. So you can, roast me in the comments below. A little bit tired here. Sorry. A lot of tanks to get through, and I've had to do this video a few times. The Peugeot CC56. It's not a tank that I particularly enjoyed. I think it was more enjoyable than Tier 7. I would say this is not a tank you really need in your garage. That's my feeling. I think there are other tanks that are better that play almost the same. Speaking of which, the 53 TP. Well. This is one of the best tanks in Tier 8, in the tech tree anyway. The armor works, the gun works, the mobility works, hold down capability, tungsten shells. There's not much to dislike about this tank. In fact, I don't know what's bad about this tank. And you put them in a platoon, these tanks are a menace because if you put them both with tungsten shells, you're going to be ripping through tanks really quickly. 4 shells, let's say, you fire one, your platoon mate fires another, you reload, he reloads, you fire again, boom, boom, and most tanks are dead. That's like 2,000 damage between the two of you in 8 seconds or something like that. I can't remember. Very deadly tank and worthy of a must-have award for sure, definitely. Now the Emil 1 would have gotten the award when it first came out. This was so good. It was one of the strongest tanks in Blitz. Oh my goodness, tier for tier. Wow, this was strong. Wargaming got the message. They nerfed it. Now it's a bit sluggish. Then it became really horrible, just so uninteresting and so dull. But then they added speed boost to kind of compensate. It's just not as good as it once was. It can still dish out the damage if you sit further back. I just don't really enjoy playing this tank anymore, sad to say. So it does not get my seal of approval. I think there's a more enjoyable tank that I'll talk about later on. The TNH 105-100. And excuse me, I'm going to get a drink here. This tank is pretty much an IS-3 variant. It gets the award for the best camo, or wildest camo, I should say. Normally I don't put stupid camo on tanks, but I just couldn't resist. It just looks so gaudy. How horrible is this? But I don't like the tank specifically because it's just uninteresting. But don't you want to roll out in this tank and just insult people? It's like adding insult to injury with your music bopping and yeah, oh my goodness me. So, do I recommend this tank? No, I do not. But get that camo and annoy people with it. That's what I say. The Samoa SM Tier 8 French premium tank. This is a solid tank. I think this is a great tank for ratings. It's easy to play. Does it get my must-have award? Oh, it's tough. It's on the edge. It's like the Skoda T56. Just knocking on the door, but I'm not going to give it the nudge. I'll say there's one tank that's a little bit more enjoyable, almost the identical playstyle, so I'm going to give this a pass. But a solid tank nonetheless. The AMX M449, is a solid heavy tank. It's very much like a heavium. The armor used to work really well. It's lost a bit of its edge simply because new tanks have come to the game with better pen. But this tank is a very easy tank to play. I think it's a good starter heavy tank. Teach you how to play many different positions. It's not one-dimensional. That's what I like. Does it get my nudge? No, I don't think it does. I would like them to kind of rework the armor slightly and give it PBR graphics and give this camo legendary status, for goodness sake. Then I might reconsider. I don't understand when you have like the Krav with its legendary camo with the Swedish flag, and you have the British tank, the Chieftain Mark 6, and they get legendary camo that looks like they're flagged. Why doesn't this get the same one? I don't get it. It's weird. So I talked about how the Samoa didn't make the cut, and that's because I think this tank nudges it out. I think it's the better of the two tanks slightly. The armor is not quite as good, but it is a little bit faster if I'm not mistaken. Could be wrong about that, but it just feels that way to me. And I've got to give one little nudge here to pump it up. I mean, look at this camo. Now, you can't get this in the store, I don't believe, right now. Eventually, I think they'll probably put it in because they want gold from you guys, or from us, I should say. But I got this in one of the monthly battle passes, and I was like, normally I would not care about camos, but this was just so good. I'm like, I've got to get that. And to me, this gets my seal of approval. Yes, it's a must-have tank, as it's one of the better clippers in Tier 8. What about the BZ-166? Well, it's a solid heavy tank. But did I enjoy this? No, I really didn't, to be honest with you. I just thought it was average. It's not hard to play, simple playstyle, but enjoyable? I don't really think so. WZ112-2, another IS-3 variant. Interesting in that it's got a great reverse speed. That makes it interesting. It's one of the better IS variants, but I mean, it can only give a few variants the award, and this is going to miss out. A long time ago, it would have been up there as the second best variant, but times have come and gone. Those times have come and gone, and it's been surpassed by a few other tanks. The Chise, a solid Tier 8 heavy. I think if you want to play a heavy tank, this is a great choice for you. The armor works, the gun depression works. A solid Tier 8 tank. Enjoyable, though, that's the question. When it first came into the game, I would say definitely yes. Now, I don't know. After playing it, it's good, but it doesn't get my nudge. I don't really think I've got to play the Chise, and that's really tough for me to put in the must-have then. So I'm saying give it a pass. The Action X is a tank I absolutely loved. I still love today. The armor works, the gun works, the mobility works. It can do something on the battlefield pretty much on every map. Versatility, great. This definitely gets my thumbs up award. Yes, get it. But I will talk about another tank later on. You probably know what I'm going to talk about that may be just as good now, which is a big surprise to me. But I really enjoyed this tank, and so I'm going to give it a must-have award. The Chieftain. I mean, obviously, it looks similar to the Tier 10 version. This tank is not a tank I ever wanted. I finally picked it up in the auction because it was cheap. It's solid. Some people recommended this tank to me. They say it's underrated. I think it is underrated. That is fair. But I can't give it the award. It's just not that much fun, in my opinion. It's a good medium type tank, or I should say heavium. Play with the mediums, you'll do fine, I think. IS-3 Defender. At one point, this was the hot dog in Tier 8. When the first game of the game, it was like, oh my goodness me, auto loader. But now, when it comes to auto loaders, this is definitely not anything that you really want to play. There's just better tanks out there. Samoa is better. The AMX is better. If the intro clip is too slow, you fire and you're like, where's that second shell? Come on, give me the second shell. So I would say give this a pass. Sad to say because it was once beastly. The IS-5, I think this gets my must-have award. Why? Not because I really think this is a great tank. Not because it's one of the best IS variants. Well, first of all, the camo does look great. I mean, that's one thing I've got to say. But the reason I say it's a must-have, it's 1,500 gold in the clan rewards. That is crazy. A tier 8 tank that you can pick up at 1500 gold and grind your, you know, credits to your heart's delight. Yeah, I say this is a must-have, not because it's a great tank, although it's very good at side scraping, probably the best IS at side scraping, but it's just not that much fun. Easy to play though. The K2, the newest IS variant. And yes, this does make the cut. The armor is beastly. The gun is a bit troll like many of the IS tanks, but yeah, you can hold lines, cause all sorts of trouble. You can have some crazy games in this tank, so it definitely gets my seal of approval. And I do like the turtle camo, must say. IS-6 used to be probably the best IS tank, but those days are long gone. Still can perform. You'll get some bounces for sure, especially against tier 7 tanks. Tier 8 mediums will sometimes bounce on it for sure, but nah, there's just better tanks out there. So, sorry. T20, another IS variant. My goodness me. It does look good with those kind of panels on the turret. I enjoy this tank because it's a little bit faster than most of the IS tanks, and I did decently well in it as well. But did I really enjoy it? I can't say I did. Nothing really that got me excited about it. So, give it a pass. The Object 252. Well, if you want a tank that's got troll armor, look no further. This is your tank. This is a must-have in my book because of the armor. Gun is a bit troll, but you can really bully a lot of tanks, cause all sorts of trouble for them. Yeah, if you want to have some silly fun, this is definitely one tank. The gun, a little bit sus, so don't try and snipe in this tank for sure. And most ISs, you're not going to be very effective if you do so, but get up close and personal with your targets, wiggle, strange angles, and you'll be surprised. Don't turn it too far, but you'll get a lot of bounces even on the side on this tank, so it's really annoying with some, again, some tanks, I will say. The KV4, I think this is a better tank out there that's similar playstyle. Used to be one of the beasts in tier 8, but yeah, it's got hit points, gun works, armor works. Just if you know how to neutralize it, it's nothing special. So I'll give this one a pass. And the original IS, which was a long time ago, a very, very, very long time ago, probably one of the best tier 8 tanks, outclassed the Tiger, outclassed most tanks, could do everything on the battlefield. It's still quite good in the sense it's agile for an IS. I've had some good games in this tank over the years for sure. It's one of the first tanks I really enjoyed in Blitz. I was like, wow, this is a great tank. But no, there's just better tanks out there. As I've already said, the K2 is one of them. The Object 252 is another. And we'll talk about one more later. So give this one a pass. The K5, well, to me, this used to be great. Then it got absolutely horrible, and pretty much everybody was kicking its ass left, right, and center. So I refused to pick it up. And then they buffed it, and now it's a lovely tank. And to me, this is a must-have tank. The armor works, the gun works. I love a fast-firing heavy tank that can cause all sorts of trouble, because if the enemy tank bounces one shell, you can push in and pump 3 shells into them and just back on up again, or even get another bounce. So that is always deadly to me. That's why the Action X is dangerous. This tank too. This is also a great ramming tank. You can really push forward against most tanks in this tank. That's why it gets my seal of approval. About the K100. Well, this was a beast. It's still solid. I think this gets my seal of approval. Yes, I say it's a must-have tank because it will teach you how to play the Maushin and the mouse ahead of it. Tier for tier, it's very competitive. It's quite fast, actually, for the size of the freaking tank. And if you put in some special modes, you can have some crazy games as well. Definitely a must-have tank in my book. Gun hits pretty dang hard. And if you platoon in them, like 2 of these, they're very deadly because they've got too many hit points to chew through. So if one tank gets hurt, you can just back on up and use his platoon mate's armor and hit points to protect him. And the 2 guns together, deadly. So yeah, definitely a great platoon tank, like the 53 TP. This tank, most people don't do well in this tank, even before it had tungsten, even before it was buffed. Even after it's gotten that stuff, it's not a tank that people perform very well in. It's more of a heavy tank, heavium. So play it with your mediums, you'll do much better. It can hold off heavy tanks because of the good reload compared to most heavy tanks. This is more of a fast-firing gun. The accuracy is good. I did well in it. I got 63%, and I wasn't a very good player at the time. And I'm like, wow, that was easy. I was platooning a lot, to be fair, but I just didn't really enjoy this tank, and I still don't. So I would say give it a pass. Against the right lineups, you can have some interesting games, I will say that. The E75TS, solid heavy tank. Absolutely solid. Not that hard to play. Pushing up, kind of go hold down, peek on over, shoot, get some bounces. For sure, heavy playstyle tank all the way. Did I enjoy it? No, I didn't. So I'm going to say give this one a pass. But an easy tank, I think, for many people to play. The VK-168, well, you won't bounce that many shells if you don't know what you're doing. And you're not really supposed to. You're supposed to absorb shells. That's what this tank is. I should call it the absorber. I enjoyed this tank when I got it. I just thought it was silly fun. It's still silly fun today. It's great for mad games and gravity and things like that. Not as good as it once was, but this is the heaviest tank tier for tier. Is it a must-have tank though? I don't think for most players it is. So I think the VK100 is a more enjoyable tank. Get that one instead. Not quite as heavy, but it's definitely faster than this slow beast. What about the Luva? And I can't pronounce it, so don't bitch and moan about that. I'm just going through these tanks. I used to call it the Louis because I didn't care. So at least I've tried to fix my pronunciation on it. The gun works. This used to be a tank that would get ripped apart frontline, but one of the best sniper heavy tanks in the game. If you played in the platoon and this sat back and supported from distance, this was a very deadly tank. And the one thing is, if you want to grind credits, this is the tank for you. I think it's the second highest credit coefficient, and it's easy to do damage because the gun works and it is accurate. Also got hit points to chew through, so yes, I would say if you... What about the Tiger II? Well, at one point, this tank was a poor man's IS-3. The IS-3 would just rip this apart left, right, and center. It was not a good tank. I didn't enjoy playing it. In fact, I absolutely hated it. Then Wargaming saw the error of their ways, like they have done with so many other tanks. They decided to give it a little bit of a buff. And not just a little bit of a buff, but a serious armor buff. And this armor works. The gun is solid. It's even decently fast. If you want a tank that epitomizes what a heavy tank is, this is the tank for you. Absolutely gets my seal of approval. The camo, simplistic, but fantastic. Looks authentic. It's an E75 in tier 8, as it should be. Great tank. Get this. You will not be disappointed, in my opinion. Armor, very, very solid. Now, the Chrysler K is an unusual tank. One of the side-scraping gods in the game. Got a buff a while back. The pen on this tank used to be absolute pants. Really struggled to deal with heavy tanks frontally. And this is a heavy tank, so that's kind of weird. It was a better medium killer. But when it comes to side scraping, there are a few tanks that do it as well as this. And in my opinion, that's why it actually gets my must-have award. Do I love this tank? No, I don't. Is it enjoyable? Yes. Is it fast? Absolutely for a heavy. And against medium tanks, they will have a tough time dealing with you, especially if you're side scraping. But the reason I recommend this tank is it's easier to learn in tier 8 how to side scrape than doing it in tier 10 with another tank we'll be talking about later. Because you're dealing with people who are less experienced and you can really take the time to learn how to side scrape properly. So that's why this tank gets my must-have award. Do I love it though? I don't really actually, but some people really do. The T-34, this was one of my grinding tanks way back when. You guys don't know how easy you have it nowadays to grind credits. It was rough going, so I would spam the heck out of this and the SU-100. I would just bounce between the two tanks. Those are the only premium tanks I had, and it allowed me to buy most of my tier 10 heavy tanks, or tier 10 tanks. End of story, because they're freaking expensive, or at least they were. I decided to put this camo on it. I thought it looks kind of different than nearly all the other camos in the game. I know it's space age-ish, but it does look kind of good. I was not a very good player when I had this tank. And I had to play against tier 10 tanks. That was really rough going. But no longer do you have to face tier 10 tanks. That's one thing, so it's a much more effective tank on the battlefield. The gun does work. Hold down capability, solid, not amazing. It's a good tank, but it's not very fun. It's a little bit dull. And that's why I'm not going to give it my seal of approval. What about the Yo? Well, it's an easy tank to play. One of the autoloaders in the game, 3 shells. If you're going to go for an autoloader, for me, I would prefer the Samoa or the AMX. A little bit more enjoyable tanks, but very solid on the battlefield, easy to play. Yeah, if you want an easy tank, this is one for you, but it doesn't get my must-have award. The T-32 is one of those hull-down gods. Quintessential American tank, just peek on over a ridge, shoot. Pen used to be absolute pants in this. You really struggle to pen most heavy tanks in tier 8 and especially 9. But it's been given a bit of a buff. It's a much better tank than it once was, but is it more enjoyable? Well, in my opinion, just go for the T-29. It's much more effective on the battlefield. Tier for tier, it's a stronger tank. And yeah, I just think if you want to learn hull down or play hull down, that's the tank for you over this. So this does not make the cut. The Yo. Unique 4-shell autoloader, but it's not really an autoloader. It's like a single shot. It's weird. I think this is a decently strong heavy tank. The armor does work, but did I enjoy it? No, I was very disappointed with it, to be honest with you. Just needs something to put it over the top that makes it more interesting. To me, it's just pretty standard heavy tank style. So yeah, I'd give it a pass. What about the T-2065, which is a medium that's classed as a heavy, as I talked about yesterday when I brought up the T-26E4. The pen on the premium is very, very solid. It does come with APCR standard. That makes it solid. If you use Pramo, I think you'll do very well in this tank. If you don't use Pramo, I think you can do not that well. It's not that good in that sense. So it's an okay tank. It just, as a heavy tank, it's definitely not armored enough, I think, except for the turret. And as a medium, it's definitely not fast enough. So it's really caught in no man's land. And therefore, I have to give this a pass. But I do love the camo on this. Look at those guns. Come on. That's, it's the sheriff. That's so American. You gotta love that. Eagle. Got even the mountain. Look at this. Look at that. I love that. That's just a nice touch. So, love the camo. Just think this needs a little bit of something to make it more interesting. So, another pass. Boy, the American tank's getting ripped apart here. Now, the Scepter is a copy-paste of the Yo. I seem to do a slightly better in the Scepter. I don't know why. Just a little bit of luck, I think. Yeah, easy tank to play. Did I like it? I mean, just easy to, rack up the credits because you can easily win, in my opinion, without much effort. But is it enjoyable? I don't know. That's up to you. I'm going to give it a pass, though. The M6A2E1 was one of the armored gods of Tier 8. When it first came into the game, it was a tough tank to deal with. Nowadays, a lot of people know what they're doing. You've got weak spots. They're easy to see, especially when you zoom in. The armor on the side is horrible. The rear, of course, is super horrible because it's an American tank. It's easy to play, but it's also hard to play at the same time. It just really depends on the lineup you're going against. It can be beastly, but it can also absolutely get shredded. So, bit of a mixed bag, and because of that, I cannot give it my seal of approval. It's very much like a T-34. It's higher up. You can get bounces for sure, but you will also get shredded. So it just depends if the enemy tanks that you're facing know what they're doing and they don't. When they don't, you'll do very well. If they do, you'll get wrecked. So I would give it a solid pass. Moving on to Tier 9, the 50 TP prototype. I really like this tank. It's fast, it's agile, it feels like a heavium, it's got tungsten shells. What's not to like about this tank? And that's why it gets my seal of approval. This is a fun tank. It can be played with the mediums, with the heavies. It's versatile. The armor kind of works. You'll get bounces from the turret for sure. Against Tier 8s, you can really do a number on them. So, get this tank, in my opinion. Tungsten really makes a tank more deadly, I must say. Likewise, well, this is pretty much a copy-paste, or sorry, this is the original of the copy-pasted 50 TP. That's what I should have said. little different angles. Turret strong, gun strong, armor kind of works. I prefer the 50T Proto just slightly, but I think they're equally good, and this one also gets my seal of approval. Yes, this is a must-have tank. And this is, remember, a tech tree tank, which gives it a little bit of a bump. If you have to part with your hard-earned or hard paid-for gold, then I'm going to kind of pull it down slightly. Tech trees are free. So if you don't want to spend the money, go for this one. And you don't need to have the 50 TP Proto because you got this tank. However, I still think the 50 TP Proto is worth having. What about the Emil 2, which is basically a Kraven tier 9 solid tank? It does have that speed boost, which I like, but I do think the tier 10 probably nudges this one out. So sorry, this will not make the cuts. I'll just leave it at that. What about the BZ68? Well, a derp gun, tier 9 heavy tanks, not very common, a little bit interesting. I really like this tank. I think it's underrated. I'm not a huge fan of Chinese tanks, generally speaking, but this one definitely makes the cut. It's a must-have tank, in my opinion. Yeah, get this and have some crazy fun games. Underrated little gem, I think. Don't see them on the battlefield these days. Now, I don't have the BZ68-2, by the way. That's a newer tank that's just come into the game, but that's pretty much a copy of the 50 TP Proto or 50 TP, so I'll give that one a pass, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but if memory serves. Don't see that on the battlefield at all, because it's super hard to get. What about the WZ1111-4? Well, I was excited about this when I got it, because I heard it was like an IS-6 in tier 9. I'm like, ooh, IS-6 way back when was very bouncy. You have some crazy games. I'm like, ooh, I'd like that. This tank stunk. I really hated this when I got it. Just was not getting any bounces, getting shredded left, right, and center. Must admit, I think the last 5 games I had this before I moved on to the tier 10, I actually had 2 5K games, crazy good games. I wish I had them to share with you. I've learned to really enjoy this tank. I think if you want to become a better player, this is one tank that will teach you a lot in the game. It's not got anything to really write home about it. It makes it very middle of the range. But if you can do well in this tank, I think you can do well in most heavy tanks. So it's an interesting tank, but definitely does not get my must-have award. What about the Type 68? This was an easy tank to play. The armor does work to a certain extent. The gun works. It's your stock, standard heavy tank. It's just not exciting. There's another tank that does what this does pretty much better in every way. We'll talk about that later. So I'd give this one a solid pass. What about the K91? Well, this was a tank that not many people were playing when I got it. It was not liked by most players. I didn't hear anything about it on YouTube or YouTubers talking about this. I got in the auction, I think, for like 9K or 8K or something like that. And I was like, that's something different. I don't have it. I'll give it a shot. I thought it was a good deal. Imagine my surprise. Wow, this tank is strong. Oh, one of the best clippers in the game. And in tier 9, probably the best 3-shell auto loadout, we'll say. Armor, decently good. Speed, very solid. And those 3 shells, absolutely devastating. This is a definite must-have. Whew, what a great tank this is. And I think this is probably the easiest I've gotten 70% out of a tank. 70% win rate. I was like, well, that was easy. I mean, I didn't platoon much, and I was just like ripping tanks or enemy team lineups, without much effort. So yeah, get this tank. What about the ST1? Well, it's got a great turret. It's as slow as molasses. Yes, they gave it speed boost, so it's a little bit better. I did take it out after they gave it speed boost and did like a 4.5k game. I carried the team to victory, 3v1 kind of thing, but it's just too slow, I think, in today's meta. Too many fast tanks, too many more maneuverable heavy tanks. So hull down, very deadly, very strong. Turret will bounce a heck of a lot of shells. But is it a must-have tank? I don't think so. I'm sorry to say. It's a shame. Give it something more. Maybe a little bit more speed. That would make it interesting again. The motion. Well, it's basically a mouse in tier 9 or VK in tier up from tier 8. In my opinion, it's just in the middle of the road. I don't think it's got anything that's more interesting than either of those two tanks. I would give this a pass. It's hard to say, but it's an easy tank to play. Just soak up some damage for your team, pop a few tanks, and you're fine. Now, this tank is another of the side-scraping gods. Probably the second one, first of all, being the Chrysler K. Not a tough tank to play. It's got tons of shell, which makes it deadly. It can do some serious hits sometimes on tanks. Did I enjoy this tank? I did not really. Side scraping is a little bit dull for me because you have to just sit and wait, and the enemy just sit there, and you just have to hold. But that's sometimes very important in games. But it's not that much fun, and it's a little bit slow. So, in my opinion, I would just go for the Chrysler K. Why? It's faster. It's easier because you go against tier 7 tanks. You can really enjoy that aspect, and it gives you more time to learn how to side scrape. This one, you go against tier 10 tanks, and those tank destroyers, if they're using Primal, will be able to pen you it's not that difficult. And if you mess up your side scraping, you're probably going to be heading to the garage pretty quickly. So I would give this a pass. What about the KPZ 70 ton? Well, again, this is a tank that was not liked by many people. It was, overlooked. It was just neglected, I would say. And the only reason I got it is because I picked it up in a crate. Just pure luck. I was like, okay, cool. Lo and behold, it's like an SU-152 with a turret. The armor's solid. I think this is a great little tank. I think this is underrated as well. Another easy tank for me to get 70%. And therefore it gets my seal of approval. Great camo too. Everything I like in a tank. Yes, get this tank if you can. The Yo, the tier 9 2-shell gun. I forget how many guns it's got, but I use the 2-shell on this one. I think this is, if you're going to go for the 2-shell, go for this over the Yo in tier 10. We'll talk about that later. If you want the 2-shell, go for this one. If you want 3-shell, go for the tier 10 one. It's an interesting tank. Sometimes it's a hard pen because of how narrow the turret is. Is it a must-have tank though? That's tough. I'm on the fence just because it's slightly different about those two. It's just almost like a T-77 in tier 9. I'm going to give it a pass, and I'll talk about why a little bit later. But it's close. It's on the edge. So you understand you're getting a very good tank, but I just didn't really enjoy it as much as a few other tanks. What about the M103? Well, this has lost a lot of love. I mean, it needs something. This used to be the medium killer, the one tank that could really defeat T-54 platoons if you had 2 of these. The hit points really helped it. The armor was solid. The turret was good. It just feels very lackluster these days, like the ST-1, which is the slow, heavy tank. This is the medium, heavium in tier 9 that really just needs a little bit more. Maybe give it a speed boost, maybe give it a little bit of armor, or just even more mobility, something. I think this would be an interesting tank in, but until that happens, I would give this a pass. There are better tanks out there that can do what this can do. Now, moving on to tier 10, starting off with this tank, the AMX 50B. Is this a tank you want in your garage? Abso-freaking-lutely. Give this a must-have award. Most of the times when I came up against this tank, it was absolute pants. I would just rip it apart, and I thought, I don't really think that tank's anything special. And then one day, I remember playing this against this pro driving this tank, and he absolutely ripped our team to shreds. And I was like, whoa, that's a tank that's worth considering. When I picked it up, I'm like, why do people do so badly in this? It is a fast T-57 and a surprisingly fast heavy tank, I must say. The armor was buffed. I believe they're going to take some armor off it in the near update, but this is a great clipper, one of the best in the game. So it is worthy of a space in your garage. Get this tank. I do not think you'll be disappointed. What about the AMX M454? Well, it's actually quite fast for such a big tank. The armor's okay-ish, the gun's solid.
But really what made this tank special, I think, was the tungsten shells. And I wanted to pick it up to use it when it had tungsten shells. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get it in my garage, and they've taken it away. However, a little birdie, or Droodles, has mentioned in one of his more recent videos that they will be giving reactive armor to this tank, and that's a bit interesting. Plus, I think sandbag. So they're going to boost its hit points, which is great. I think this will be an interesting tank at that time, but at present, will it make my must-have list? Sadly, it does not. The BZ75 is, of course, the last in the line of the Chinese heavies. Unfortunately, tier for tier, I don't think it's as good as the tier 9. I gave the tier 9 my seal of approval, but this tank doesn't get it. So I just think it's just not as good as the tier 9. Tier 9 was much more enjoyable. The Type 71, well, if you want bounces, look no further. It's probably the Object 252 of tier 10. You'll get some crazy bounce in this tank. Bounces that you definitely should not get. And I believe that this will be getting a buff in an upcoming update. They did nerf it, and it's lost a lot of its, oomph in the game. I rarely see them on the battlefield, but still the armor works. And don't sleep on this tank. It's solid. Does it get my must-have award? That's the question, though. I think absolutely. If you want to learn how to take some shells and ricochet and everything, you're not soaking up damage. You're just bouncing the shells. I definitely think this is worthy of a space in your garage. Now, the Super Conch, of course, is a hull-down beast. Everybody knows that. Just peek on a ridge. It's Hesh. HE is very effective. I think it would be better with Hesh because it's, after all, British tank. Because it doesn't have the Hesh round, I'm not going to include it in my must-have list. Sorry to say. I know those people will be shouting and ranting and raving at the screen right now, but I'm sorry. I just don't think it's that enjoyable. I prefer the Conqueror ever since it's been buffed. Can't remember if I've talked about that just yet, but yeah, this tank does not make my list. The F215B, it's a very interesting tank. It's a very different tank. There's no real tank like it in the game. That uniqueness is special, but is it enjoyable? It's hard to use this. It's a great medium killer, and it's also got a fantastic gun. The Hesh or HE is extremely good. I think it's more enjoyable than the Super Conch, but it is also harder to use. And because of that, I'm not going to include it in my must-have list. Sorry to say. I just don't think it's that enjoyable. What about the Chieftain Mark 6? Well. Where have you been all my life? This is a lovely tank. It's one of the best premium tanks in tier 10, if you ask me. Can do a little bit of everything on the battlefield. It's versatile. It's got a very solid gun. It's decently mobile. The armor sometimes will work, especially hull down. It can do a little bit of everything, so it definitely gets my seal of approval. Yeah, I mean, what's not to like? Play with the mediums, play with the heavies, even snipe in this tank, and you'll do okay. So get this tank, you'll enjoy it. And just so we're clear, I don't recommend sniping it. What about the IS-7? This was, I believe, my first ever tier 10 tank. And I was like, wow, because the turret was godly. And it is still godly to this day. It's actually been changed over the years. It got faster, then it got nerfed, and now it's slower, better armor, etc., etc. I think this definitely deserves a place in your garage. It is a must-have tank. That turret is crazy strong in certain positions. You can really do a number in this tank. I don't think that it's that hard to play. You just have to get into the right positions and you will be fine. Just protect, of course, that lower plate area. But a very good heavy tank, and one of the more enjoyable ones, I felt. For heavy playstyle. Now the IS-4 used to also be up there with its crazy, not side-scraping abilities, but abilities to get some crazy bounces here and there. The gun works, but they've nerfed it, and it's just no longer the bouncy, crazy tank it once was. That title has moved over to the Type 71, and I just don't think this is the tank that it used to be, so it's not going to make the cut. Oh, sad day that is. The VK7201K, well, when I first got it, I didn't like it. Then they reworked it, changed it a little bit, and now I freaking love this. I think this is a must-have in your garage. It's not a side-scraping tank, but a tank you should really just get in the face of other tanks, and that's why I like the uniqueness of it. You'll really bully people with this gun, and you'll get some crazy bounces as well. You will get wrecked from time to time because you don't know what you're doing. That's okay, but just have a little bit of faith sometimes and really punish, especially tier 9 tanks with this tank. So get on the battlefield and rock on out. Now the Yo is another clipper, very similar to the T57. I love the AMX. I think that's my favorite clipper in tier 10, but this is not far behind. It's a very solid tank. It's got good gun depression, being an American tank, or decent gun depression, I should say. You can really cause trouble with people. Now, many people will say go with the 2-shell. I never had much luck with the 2-shell. I would miss one shell. I would sometimes bounce one shell, and I'm like, yeah, I'm stuck on this long freaking reload. Just didn't really enjoy it. I would go with the 3-shell autoloader, even though people tell me, well, that's not what the tank is for. I'm sorry, I just didn't enjoy the 2-shell. If you want 2-shell, go to tier 9. I think it's better in tier 9. But does this make my must-have list? Yes, it does. A very strong, easy to use, and rather enjoyable clipper. What about the Lycan? Well, it's very tigerish. It's got a solid gun, it hits pretty hard, decently fast, armor will get you a few bounces, just depending on the targets you're facing. Is that enough to make my must-have list? Well, no. However, there are two things that might push it up. Let me think about it for a second. The first being that the modules can't really be damaged. I believe the crew can be damaged. I was told it's a phantom crew, or I read somewhere, and I don't think that's right. I think maybe the modules can't be damaged. It's got something unique about the modules anyway. So a lot of them, it can't be put on fire, something like that. Anyway, something special. Does that make it enough? Does all that the package, does that make it enough to be put in my must-have list? Well, no, but if we scroll down here, we do see one little interesting fact. 10 degrees of gun depression in a heavy tank? Where do I sign up? Absolutely, this gets my seal of approval. Do I love the tank? Well, not exactly, but its uniqueness, that's 10 degrees, that's just enough to push it into the must-have area. But is it a tank I love? No, but it is a little bit different. That's why it squeaks into my must-have awards. What about this freaking monstrosity, the ground tank? Well, you don't see them around very much these days, but dang, this tank is one tough cookie. Look at that gun. Oh my god. I don't like science fiction tanks. This is a tank game. I think tanks should look like tanks. This doesn't look like a tank, but, well, it does kind of in space. But think about that. I mean, it's Dune. I mean, kind of an epic movie in history, some very cool scenes. I would say, yeah, you gotta get this tank if you can. This is a must-have tank. The armor is solid, the gun hits hard. Yeah. Very strong tank. Against the right teams, you'll absolutely decimate them. The Tornwagen, well, unlike, I suppose it's along with the Yo, the tier 9 Yo, there's no tank with a more slender turret that I can think of. This is a very strong tank. It's a hull-down tank. Is it very enjoyable? No, but does it give you enough to be a must-have tank? I think yes. Again, another squeaker just gets in there, suffers a little bit because of the enjoyment factor, quote unquote, but you peek over a ridge and you can really be in a very strong position and cause all sorts of trouble for enemy lineups. So yes, it does make the cut. The Emil 1951. Well, I did not give the nudge to the tech tree version, but what about this one? Well, at first I definitely thought this was the weaker of the two, but over time I've come to enjoy this tank. It feels very much like an AMX 50B down in tier 8. That means you can train in lower tiers. You can absolutely rock against tier 7 tanks. You can have some crazy good games in this tank. It's mobile, it's versatile. Gets my must-have award. Yes, pick up this tank if you want to play the autoloader style tanks. The Type 57. Well, another IS variant. This one is a rather hard-hitting one too. The gun can really dish out the damage, but wow, is this gun troll. Oh my gosh, it's probably the most troll of all the IS variants. Skoda T56 being second, and maybe 252 in a close third. But this one, my goodness me, I've had some horrible misses. So yeah, if you can just make sure you aim in, I think this is a very tough hombre to deal with, and it's going to get my must-have award. It hits harder than the Object 252. The armor's not quite as good, but it is a little bit faster. Yes, one of the best IS variants, if you ask me, and it looks pretty dang cool. So I would definitely put that in my garage, or keep it in my garage, I should say. What about the Charlemagne? Does it make the cut? Well, first off, let me say what a fantastic looking tank this is. Look at this, the electric moving along the barrel there. That's what it's called, the barrel. That wasn't coming to me earlier when I was making these videos. Goodness me. It looks the business. It's got HESH. That's definitely a plus, making it unique on the battlefield. It's got decent gun depression. It's a solid tank. You can have some crazy interesting games in this tank, and for that, it definitely gets my seal of approval. Yes, this is a must-have tank in your garage, if you ask me. If you like HESH or like any other British tanks, you've got to get this to add to the collection. What about the Carnarvon, the Tier 8 Tech Tree tank, which is basically the basis for the Action X? This used to be the worst version of the Action X. They reworked this tank, they gave it a little bit more alpha. Now this is the harder hitting, slightly, ever so slightly worse armor tank. Does it still make the cut? I think it does. If you like the Action X, I think you're going to like this tank very much. Now, I did well in it. I had 58% before it got buffed. Now it's even better. It's also got the speed boost, which I always like, and you add on to a tank. So yes, this makes the cut. What about the Keeler? Well, the Luva didn't make the cut. The Tiger 2 did. And the E75 did not. E75 TS, I'm sorry, did not make the cut. What about this one? It's basically an E75 TS chassis and the Luva turret. Let me tell you, one time I came up against this tank, and I can't remember what tank I was playing. I just could not pen this tank. It was freaking invulnerable, and you'll get some crazy good bounces in this tank. And for that reason, it's gotta be a must-have tank. I absolutely love this tank. It is the best of both worlds. Better than the E75 TS and better than the Luva. It's got the best of both worlds there. So get this tank. The T77, the 2-shot in Tier 8. Not a very common sight. The 2-shell autoloader. Well, this is one must-have tank. Yes, it is a very deadly tank in Tier 8, although the pen is not quite as good as I'd hope with the APCR shells, the standard shells on this. But yeah, just if you get the right ammo loaded for the tanks you're facing, you'll be fine. Very solid tank. Just be careful about that long reload. Don't go alone. Stay with your partner or your platoon mate or your teammate, whatever, and you should be just fine. What tank should you team up with? Well, Here's a suggestion. Why not take the Shark, the T-54E2? This is definitely a must-have tank. One of the strongest tanks in Tier 8. The armor works, the gun works, the turret works, the depression works, the speed works. There's not much to dislike about this tank. I will say one thing though. They did, I feel, nerf this tank almost like a sneaky nerf. I don't know what they did, but you're going to have to use more APCR now. The AP is just not as reliable as it once was, but it's still a very strong tank and one that can be counted to get some crazy bounces, especially against Tier 7 tanks. They have really struggled to pin this tank, but even Tier 9s will sometimes have trouble with this tank. So definitely a tank you want in your garage. What about the VZ51? I didn't give it to the Tier 7. I didn't give it to Tier 8. What about the Tier 9? I am sad to say no. It just doesn't offer anything very interesting. Nothing. It's just a stock standard heavy type tank. Yeah, of course it can do the business. It's okay. It's like a Skoda T56, but the Skoda T56 feels strong in Tier 8. And that's close to my must-have area. Or I can't remember if I gave it the nudge. Maybe I did. I went back and forth, I can tell you that. But this one just doesn't feel as good tier for tier. So if you want this playstyle, just go for the Skoda T56. Although you have to pay gold for it, which is a negative. What about the Progetto, the Tier 9 Heavy, Italian Tier 9 Heavy? The best thing about this tank is actually its Premo. Yes, the not APCR. I can't think. The heat on this is freaking awesome. You can shred tanks. I forget what the pen is exactly, but it's extremely high for a Tier 9 tank. So that makes it interesting. It means it's very effective even against Tier 10 tanks, and one that should not be overlooked. That's why it gets my must-have award. If you want a tank that can pen pretty much anything, this is the Tier 9 tank for you. What about the AMX 5120? Well, I must admit, when I got it, I didn't really like it because I was playing it wrong. I was playing it as a tank to do damage instead of a tank to clear other tanks, because you can dish out quite a lot of damage. So if you see a tank with 700 hit points or so, yeah, you're golden. 2 shells, well, you got 3 shells in the chamber. You should be able to take them out, no problem, and poof, another tank's gone. Or 2 tanks, they're sitting at 200, sayonara. Yeah, so that's when it becomes a great tank. But I prefer the Tier 10, and so this one does not make the cut for me. The WZ-114, this is kind of the quintessential heavy, beastly gun, tough armor to deal with, a little bit sluggish. But that sluggishness is a problem. It just doesn't feel good on the battlefield, generally speaking. Yes, you'll get bounces. Yes, you'll hit hard. Yes, you'll have big games. But enjoyable? I don't really think so. So I would say give this one a pass. Now, I didn't give the nudge to the 215B. I said I preferred the Conqueror, but is the Conqueror a must-have tank? Well, first of all, it's got a speed boost. Hint, hint. I've given it a cool camo. Second hint. And they buffed it a while ago. I always liked this tank. The gun was fantastic. Yes, it didn't have that much armor for heavy tank, but I found it a very strong tank. And then they buffed it. Speed boost and better pen, or I forget, better armor or something. I forget what they did, but it became even better. So this is, at present, as long as they don't nerf it again, this is a fantastic tank. And if you like British heavies, I think this is one of the best in the game. So absolutely a must-have tank in my opinion. The IS-8, well, this is one Tier 9 tank that I really struggled with. It was my first Tier 9 tank in the game, and it just wasn't very good. The grind was horrible. I couldn't pen most Tier 10 tanks. I really struggled. I didn't understand this was a heavy. I was playing it like an IS-3, and it's not an IS-3. It should be played with the mediums, and I didn't get that, so I was getting wrecked out, frustrated. I've gotten much better. I understand how to play it now. It's a decent, if not very good, heavium, but do I really enjoy it? I don't know. I think this tank is one that will test your skill level. So if you want something that's not super easy and just solid, I think this is the tank you want to try out in tier 9. But will it make the cut? No, it does not. The object 452, well, it's pretty dang flat, and that makes it interesting. But is it so interesting that it makes the cut? It's not that interesting. It just feels a little weaker than the IS-8. Similar playstyle. You can get some very good bounces in the right positions, but finding those positions on the map, not that easy, and just getting the right angle. Sometimes you'll put yourself in the position you think, hey, I'm definitely going to bounce shells, and you're just a little bit, a little bit off, and you get wrecked. So I cannot give it the nudge. Decently fast tank, but to me, I would just go for the IS-8 over this one. And that's a premium tank, so. What about the Object 752? Well, in my opinion, this is the creme de la creme in tier 9. The camo's kind of funky, but that's okay. It's a funky tank. I love this tank. It is very, very strong. It's the best two-shot in the game, if you ask me. It's got no real weakness. Armor works. Gun works. The mobility works. Yes, yes, and yes. It's a little bit overcooked, unfortunately, but it's not too overcooked if it's played alone. But if it's played in a platoon with another Object 272, you're in for a world of hurt, usually. But is it a fun tank? It is. So it's definitely a must-have tank, in my opinion. Yeah. I paid, I think, 15k gold for this, and I'm not disappointed in the least. The E75, well, it's a Tiger 2 in tier 9. It was my favorite of the German heavy line I got. And this is the first heavy tank. First tank, actually, I think I cleared 62%. I was like, and quite easily, I was like, wow, I'm a much better player. My platoon mate was saying, man, you're much better. You're really good in this tank. And I was just kicking ass left, right, and center. I really like this tank. Is it better than the Tiger tier for tier? I think the Tiger tier for tier is very strong, but the E75 is one of the ultimate tanks in Blitz, if you ask me. Very much a heavy tank. You can hold the line, you can side scrape, you can really bully tanks with your gun. This is an awesome tank. Quite fast, actually, for what it is. I think this is a must-have tank. Definitely worthy of a space in your garage. What about the Straswagen K? I have heard from Little Birdie, aka Droodles, as I said, that this is going to get nerfed and buffed in a future update. That's a shame. What it really needs is their super speed boost. That's what made this tank interesting. I loved it. I absolutely freaking loved it with super speed boost. When you take that away, it's a good tank, but remember, I like the Scent playstyle. The Scent 7.1 used to be one of my favorite tanks. The Scent 5.1 is a very solid tank. Defender Mark 1 solid. This is the heavy version of those tanks. I still love it. It's a must-have tank, in my opinion. But I admit it's not as good as it once was, and I think it needs a little something because it's not as enjoyable as it once was, I think, for most players. I still love it, but yeah, I don't know if you'll agree with me on that one. That's a tough one for me to talk about. The Krav, well, one of the ultimate hull-down beasts in Blitz. I'm going to give this the edge over the Super Conch that I said earlier that didn't make the cut. With the 3 shells, it makes it a little bit interesting. The turret armor is pretty godly, and for that reason, and the camo does look pretty cool, I've got to give it a must-have. Yeah, this one is one that I didn't do well in the beginning, but once you get a handle on it, you're fine. It is a shame they took I think the speed boost was on there before, and they got rid of that. I don't know if it's... Oh, they do have it, so I can just get rid of that. So, and I can put that on. There we go. Yeah, that's what made it interesting. Don't know why that was not there. So, moving right along, we have the VZ55. I think this is underrated. I think this is an enjoyable tank. I think it's a solid tank. Does it make the cut? No, it does not. It's not a hard tank to play. It's another one of those standard heavy tanks, but that's just not enough to give it the edge. I think it's underrated, but yeah, sorry. I just think there are better tanks out there. And I think if you want to play this, just go in tier 8 and just ride around with Skoda. What about the 60 TP? Well, I mean, what's not like about this tank? The gun really hits hard. It's got tungsten shell. It's even harder. The ammo works decently well. Speed is very solid. Everything that you want in a heavy tank. Much better than the VZ, in my opinion. One of the strongest tier 10 heavies. I really love this tank. It's just got one fatal flaw. Is that enough to knock it out of the must-have category? No. Give this sucker a must-have tank. Yes. No, I mean, give this a must-have award. The only weakness it has is its freaking ammo rack. I don't think I've been ammo racked more in tier 10 than in this tank. Oh my goodness, I can't tell how many games where I haven't taken any hits. I'm just dominating the game. I'm racking up 3.5k, moving in to start, picking off the last few tanks and push myself up to probably 5.5 or 6k games, and I get ammo racked. And I'm like, again? It's frustrating. That's the only thing about this tank. But is it good? Yes, it is. Now, the Rinoceronte. This is a great little tank. 2-shell, heavy tank that is decently fast. The armor is pretty solid. Does it make my cut? Yeah, I think it does. Give this tank a must-have award. A really enjoyable tank, and one that's not hard to get a handle on. When we go to the other side of the spectrum, and we talk about tanks that are hard to learn how to play, this was one of the hardest to learn. Because the traverse used to be so bad. You'd put yourself in a tough position, try to get out of it. You could not get the heck out of there. Because it was so freaking slow. It was a really rough tank to deal with. But, I mean, in the right position, it was really tough to deal with. But if you got yourself in the wrong position, man, teams would rip you apart left, right, and center. And that's what made it a tough tank to play. However, it received a buff a while back, and now it definitely gets my must-have award. This is one of the holders in Blitz. You can really hold the line against two tanks, and if you put a platoon of them on the battlefield, played together, very, very deadly. And for that reason, it gets my must-have award. The Object 260. This tank is one of the tanks that I've enjoyed playing, but when it was a faster tank, it got buffed and nerfed speed-wise, I think, buffed in DPM and maybe armor, but that's not what made this tank unique. It was its speed, and I lost the enjoyment factor. Is it still a solid tank? Yes. It feels like an IS-8 in tier 10. The IS-8 didn't make the cut, and neither will this. I think it's got to get its speed back. That's what made this tank interesting. The Object 7. I mean, it looks great. If you want another crazy tank that can do all sorts of things on the battlefield, a versatile tank, this is definitely one of them. Gun depression's not the best, but you can have some crazy games in this tank. I would say this is a must-have tank, and that's why I paid 25,000K for this tank. But do I regret it? No, I do not. What about the E100, a tech tree tank that has, well, what pretty much everybody wants? A big booming gun, armor, beastly type tank. You can have some crazy good games in this, even if you're not a very good player, just because the gun hits hard. The armor or the hit points will keep you alive. The armor will get you 1 or 2 bounces every now and then. It's not got the best armor. It's a little bit underrated, I think. In the right positions, and if it's played well, it can be very strong. What can I say? It's a classic, and it definitely gets my must-have award. Yeah, you can have great games in this tank, that's for sure. And it's not that hard to do decently well in it. The VK9001P, the ultimate side-scraping tank, and because of that, I've got to give it a seal of approval. Yes, this is a must-have tank. And this tank is tough to dislodge if it's side scraping properly. Oh my goodness. And it's actually surprisingly fast. So unlike the VK 7201 and the E100 and the mouse, this tank is quite agile, and you can actually play it as sort of a heavium and a very effective one in my opinion. So I would say this is a must-have tank. Looks cool too, must say that. What about the mouse? I gave the award to the VK 100 in tier 8. I didn't give it to the mouse. What about the mouse? Absolutely. This tank is crazy fun, but you gotta be willing to soak up damage, and I love soaking up damage for my team. There's no tank like it that's gonna soak up more damage and get some crazy bounces at the same time. It's really annoying to deal with this tank. If you put 2 of them in a platoon, dear God, that's over 6,000 hit points to deal with. Oh my goodness me, you can really punish the enemy teams just because of how many hit points you have, and that makes them unique and deadly on the battlefield. The gun is actually surprisingly good. I think it's underrated. This is a great tank, in my opinion. The T-57. This is the heavy version of the AMX 50B. It's slower, but the armor's a little bit better. It hits hard. Should you get this in the garage? In my opinion, absolutely. Yes, this is another must-have tank. You've also got that special consumable that allows you to fire your shells faster. Yeah, if you want a damage machine, this is definitely one of them. Not hard to do 3K in a tank for sure. And this tank you might not have seen before. Well, I'm lying. You should have seen this before. It's a Concept 1B, but now it's equipped with the 10-year camo that I got for playing 10 years. So I've been around a while. I know this game. That's a little, I'm telling my age a little bit. This is a very strong tank in the right positions. Is it a must-have tank? Well, it's got one of those turrets like the Tornwagen. So this is a Tornwagen tier 10 for me. There's not many other tanks like it. And for that reason, I've got to give it a must-have award. It is agile for a heavy. The gun is solid. Yeah, it's a very enjoyable tank, and one I think deserving of a space in your garage. Now, the T95E6 is an interesting tank. Came into the game, people didn't like it. I picked it up cheap at an auction, I think 10K or 11K or something like that. Nobody really wanted it. I got it. I'm like, this is a great freaking tank. It's a medium killer. It's an awesomely fast, heavy tank. It's classed as a heavy, but it's more like a medium. But it's got the hit points and the armor to deal with a lot of medium tanks. It really can shred. So without much effort, I would run around, and I think it ended up at that point when I hit 100 games, I think it was at 64%, 65%. It was easy, and I really liked that. I think it was around 88 games. I had that much. Maybe I dropped down a little bit, but it is a very enjoyable tank, and I think worthy of a space in your garage. This is the ultimate heavium, if you ask me. And then it's got a buff, and I was like, oh my god, this tank's even better. So yes, yes, and yes. The last tank that I have, I'm missing one tank. I just realized, the Caro. That's a medium tank. I just realized it should have been mentioned. I guess I'll just throw it in here before I do this tank. But the Caro, that's a tough one. I'm not sure it's a must-have tank, but it is a interesting tank. And interesting tanks, camo does look good, but yeah, I'm not going to say it makes my list in its present form. What about the E5? Well, this tank is a legend. This tank has gone through a lot of changes. It went from being one of the easiest tanks to deal with because of the cupola to one of the most godly tanks. Gave it everything, to one of the weaker tanks, and now they've, I think, got in the right position where it's a very solid tank. I think it's maybe slightly overcooked. It is basically a Shark in tier 10, and the Shark's enjoyable. This is enjoyable. The gun works, the armor works, the speed works, a little bit of everything, all rolled into one. Definitely a must-have, in my opinion. And there you have it. Light tanks, tank destroyers, mediums, and now heavies. That's a frick ton of tanks to go through. It took me time to make this video, as I had these videos, I should say, because I had to do them 2 or even 3 times. I hope you've enjoyed this little series. Again, these things will change over time. Some tanks will lose their luster. They'll be nerfed or just surpassed by other tanks. That's just the nature of a game. Otherwise, games get stale, and it's unfair because some tanks just become too dominant, and other tanks just can't really compete. So it's nice that they keep shifting things around and buffing, nerfing. I'm a fan of that. I do think they get things right, and they do get things wrong at wargaming. But generally speaking, over time, they seem to right their wrongs and fix what needs to be fixed. Do I think they would benefit from listening to the community more? Probably. Trudels often puts his suggestions, and I often share my suggestions. I don't agree with all of his. I have my own opinions. I hope you've enjoyed hearing mine, and you've been listening to me ramble on for, I suppose, a total of almost 2 hours now over the past few days. I do thank you for that. We'll be back to our normal daily videos of gameplay, but I thought I'd put this together, and I hope you found it helpful. That's all I got for you. I'll see you tomorrow. Snugs on Blitz, out.